I need to make sure I use completely new character names, avoiding all names in the file. Raymond, Renata, Sophie, Marcus, Frank Calloway, Daniel, Carla, Patricia, Gerald McDonald, Aaron, Melissa, Joanne, Howard, Nora, Brett, Walt. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who cries in a parking lot, 63 years old, retired from 22 years as a county social worker. And I'm sitting in my truck outside a Walgreens at 2 in the afternoon, hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying a phone call I got 40 minutes ago from a woman I'd only spoken to once in my life. Her name was Dolores. She cleaned houses for a living. And what she told me in that call, her voice so tight and thin it barely sounded human, changed everything I thought I knew about my own son. Let me back up. My name is Edmund. Ed, most people call me. I live alone now, have for about 6 years, since my wife Pauline passed from a stroke this spring after we celebrated our 38th anniversary. We had one child together, a son named Clifton. Cliff, handsome kid, always sharp, always knew what to say. I was proud of him the way fathers get proud, when they see themselves in someone, but better, smoother, more confident, less afraid. Cliff married a woman named Vivienne about 9 years ago. She was pretty, in a cold sort of way. The kind of pretty that makes you feel like you should straighten your collar when she walks in. I never warmed to her, and I think she knew it, but we kept things civil for Cliff's sake. They had a daughter 2 years into the marriage. They named her June. June was the best thing that ever happened to our family. I know grandparents say that. It's a cliché, but if you had sat with that little girl on my back porch while she explained to you, very seriously, with a stick she'd found in the yard, why earthworms come out after rain, you would understand that some clichés exist because they are simply true. She had Pauline's eyes, that particular shade of hazel that catches light differently, depending on the time of day. She was 7 years old, and she was the only reason I still looked forward to Sunday mornings. Vivian left Cliff 3 years ago. I won't pretend I understood all the details. Cliff gave me the version that made him look best, and I've been around long enough to know that's the only version you get from your own child. What I do know is that the divorce was ugly, the custody hearing was uglier, and when it was over, Cliff had primary custody of June because Vivienne had moved out of state with someone she'd met at her office. She gave up her daughter. I've turned that fact over in my mind many times. I don't know what was happening inside her life that led her there. I try not to judge, but the result was that June was living full-time with Cliff, and Cliff had recently started dating a woman named Tara. Tara, I want to be careful here, because I'm trying to tell this honestly and not just as the villain's origin story. When I first met Tara, she seemed fine, friendly enough. She laughed at Cliff's jokes, which Pauline always said was the clearest sign someone was either in love or had bad taste. Tara had no children of her own. She made that clear early on, said she'd never wanted them, said it the way people say they don't like cilantro, like it was a mild personal preference rather than a detail that might matter when you're dating a man with a 7-year-old. I noticed things over the following months, but I told myself I was being a paranoid old man. June seemed quieter when Tara was around. Not scared, just smaller somehow. Like she was taking up less space on purpose. I brought it up once with Cliff, casually, over a beer in his garage. He told me I was projecting. He told me June was just going through an adjustment period. He said Tara was great with her, and I just hadn't seen it yet, because I didn't come around enough. That last part stung, so I let the rest go. Then, this past April, Cliff told me he and Tara were going to Sedona for 10 days, a trip they'd been planning since January, a rental house near the Red Rocks, some hiking, some spa days. He'd already arranged everything, he said. June would be fine. He had it handled. I asked who was watching her. He said Tara's cousin was going to check in. I asked what check-in meant. He got a little vague. Said the cousin would stop by. That June was old enough to manage on her own for stretches. She was almost 8 now. Smart kid, responsible. He said it like it was a compliment to her. I felt something cold move through me then, but Cliff was already talking about the rental and the elevation, and I didn't push it. I should have pushed it. That's something I'll carry for a long time, that I didn't push it. The day before Cliff and Tara left, I called June's school to ask if there was anything coming up. Projects, events, anything I could help with. The school secretary mentioned that June had missed 4 days the previous month. I hadn't known that. Cliff hadn't mentioned it. I called Cliff. He said she'd had a cold. He sounded irritated that I was calling. He and Tara were packing. They left on a Saturday. On the following Thursday, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. I was in the middle of making lunch, a grilled cheese I'd been looking forward to, and the number had a local area code but no name attached. I picked up on the fourth ring. "Is this Edmund Hale?" A woman's voice. Older. Something in it that made me set down the spatula. "It is," I said. "Mr. Burt Hale, my name is Dolores Ruiz. I work for Sunshine Cleaning Services. I was hired today to clean a house on Sycamore Glen Road. The billing account lists you as the secondary contact. I'm sorry to call you directly, but I didn't know what else to do." Sycamore Glen. That was Cliff's address. "What's wrong?" I asked. She paused. Not a dramatic pause, a scared one. The kind where someone is deciding how to say something they don't want to say. "Mr. Hale, I was cleaning the upstairs. The second bedroom, the one off the hallway. The door was locked and I was just going to skip it, but then I heard a sound. From inside." My hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of sound?" "Like crying," she said. "Very soft." I thought it was a television at first, but it was coming from right behind the door. I knocked, and it stopped. And then I said, "Is someone in there?" And a little voice said yes. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because when I became aware of myself again, I was in a kitchen chair. "She told me her name was June," Dolores continued, and her voice was shaking now. "She said she was hungry. She asked if I had any food. She said her dad was away and she'd run out of the crackers she had. I was already moving. Jacket, keys, phone. The grilled cheese burning on the stove and I didn't care. Is she still there? Are you still there with her?" "Yes, sir. The door's locked, but I'm talking to her through it. She sounds okay, but she's scared." I wasn't sure if I should call 911. I didn't want to do the wrong thing. "Call 911, I said. "Right now. Tell them there's a child alone and she needs help. I'll be there in 12 minutes. I got there in 9. The police were already on the way when I pulled up. Dolores met me at the front door. A compact woman in her 50s, with a cleaning apron still tied around her waist, and her eyes red. She'd used her own key that the service had been given and let me inside. I went straight to the bedroom door and knocked. "Junebug," I said. I hadn't called her that since she was 4, but it came out automatically. "It's Grandpa Ed. I'm right here. Can you open the door?" A long pause. "I don't have a key," she said. Her voice was so small, I had to press my forehead against the door to hear it. "Dad said don't open it for anybody, but the key is on his dresser." "That's okay," I said. "I'll get it." I found the key on Cliff's dresser, next to a cologne bottle and a phone charger. I unlocked the door. I had been a county social worker for more than 2 decades. I had walked into situations that would make a normal person's knees give out. I thought I was insulated, that the years had given me some kind of armor. I was wrong. June was sitting on the floor next to the bed. She was wearing the same outfit she'd clearly had on for at least 2 days, leggings and a long-sleeve shirt that said "Be Kind" on it, which broke me in a way I still can't fully explain. Her hair was tangled. There was an empty sleeve of crackers on the floor, and 2 empty juice boxes, a little pile of books she'd apparently been reading to pass the time. She looked at me with those hazel eyes, Pauline's eyes, and she said, "Grandpa, I was really hungry," in the most matter-of-fact voice, like she was reporting the weather. I picked her up. She was lighter than I expected. By the time the officers arrived, I had her in the kitchen eating a peanut butter sandwich Dolores had made from what was in the cabinets. Dolores, who had stayed the whole time, who had found the bread and the peanut butter without being asked, who I will owe something I can't name for the rest of my life. The officers took a report. I told them Cliff was in Sedona, gave them his number. I told them about the locked door, the empty food, the cousin who was supposed to check in, and apparently hadn't checked in at all. One of the officers, young guy, couldn't have been more than 30, kept his face professionally neutral, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working. Child Protective Services arrived within the hour. A woman named Beverly, calm and efficient, who sat with June while June finished her sandwich and told Beverly about the book she'd read and the game she'd invented involving her stuffed rabbit and an elaborate system of pretend rules. Beverly made notes and did not let her expression crack, which is a professional skill I recognized and respected. I stepped into the hallway. "How long do you think she was in there?" I asked Beverly, quietly. Beverly looked at me carefully. "Based on what she's told me and the condition of the room, I'd estimate at least 4 days. Possibly 5. Cliff and Tara had been gone for 6. I called Cliff's cell. No answer. I called 3 more times. On the 4th attempt, Tara picked up. I could hear the wind in the background, outdoor sounds, the easy noises of a vacation. "Ed?" "Cliff's in the shower. Do you want him to—" "Put him on the phone," I said. "Right now." Something in my voice stopped her cold. Cliff called back in 4 minutes. I told him what had happened. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "She was supposed to have food. I left her food." I looked across the hallway at my granddaughter, explaining her stuffed rabbit's legal system to a CPS caseworker. "Come home," I said. "Come home right now." He did. They got a red-eye from Phoenix. But those hours, while they were in the air, I sat in Cliff's kitchen with June asleep on the couch under a blanket I'd found in the closet. And I thought about every moment I'd dismissed, every concern I'd softened, every time I'd let Cliff's irritation redirect me. 22 years doing child welfare work, and I had not protected my own grandchild. I made a decision that night. When Cliff and Tara walked through the front door at 6 in the morning, Tara had sunglasses on at 6 a.m., which told me everything I needed to know about how she'd spent the flight. Cliff looked scared in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager and had wrecked Pauline's car. He started to speak, and I held up my hand. "June is fine," I said. "She's asleep. We'll talk." We talked. It was not a gentle conversation. Cliff said it had only been supposed to be a couple days, that he'd arranged for the cousin to check in, that things had just gotten— he searched for the word complicated. He said June was mature for her age. He said he hadn't thought it would be a problem. Tara said nothing. She had taken off the sunglasses. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall. I told Cliff I was contacting my attorney that morning. I told him I was filing for emergency temporary custody of June, and that given what had happened, he would be very unlikely to oppose it successfully. I told him I loved him and that I was not doing this to punish him, but to protect his daughter. Then I told him that if he made this difficult, I had 22 years of professional knowledge about family court systems, and I was prepared to use every bit of it. He didn't make it difficult. The emergency custody order came through faster than I expected given the CPS report and the police documentation. June came to stay with me. She brought the stuffed rabbit, his name I learned was Captain, and 3 books and a backpack covered in iron-on patches. The first night, she asked me if her dad was in trouble. I told her that her dad had made some mistakes, and that grown-ups had to be accountable for their mistakes, but that her dad loved her, and that I loved her, and that she was safe. She thought about that for a minute. "Dolores was really nice," she said. "She was," I agreed. "She made good sandwiches." "She did." June nodded, like this was sufficient information, and went to sleep. The custody hearing was 3 weeks later. My attorney, a sharp woman named Priscilla who had handled Cliff's original divorce case and knew the family history, presented the full picture. The locked room, the state June had been found in, the missed school days, the complete absence of Tara's cousin during the entire 10-day trip. What I hadn't known until Priscilla dug it up was that the cousin had texted Cliff on day 2 saying she couldn't make it, and Cliff had said okay and not arranged any alternative. He had simply left the situation as it was. When I heard that in the courtroom, I had to work very hard to keep my face still. The judge was a methodical man who asked careful questions and gave nothing away. But he granted the full custody modification. June would live primarily with me. Cliff would have visitation rights, supervised initially, transitioning to unsupervised after a completed parenting course and 3 months of documented compliance. Tara's role in June's life would be, for now, non-existent unless the court revisited. Priscilla shook my hand outside the courtroom and said, "Good outcome," in the measured tone that told me she'd seen worse and wasn't built for celebration. I thanked her. I walked to my truck. I sat there for a while. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, the way revenge stories are supposed to end. Justice served, villain punished, hero vindicated. I didn't feel that. What I felt was tired and sad and grateful in a way that had an ache running through it, because Pauline wasn't here, and she would have known what to do every single step of the way. I called Dolores that evening. I'd gotten her number from the cleaning service. She sounded surprised that I called. I told her what had happened. I told her that because she hadn't talked herself out of knocking on that door, my granddaughter was okay. She was quiet for a moment. "I almost didn't knock," she said. "I thought maybe it was a radio. I thought maybe I was overreacting." "I'm glad you didn't talk yourself out of it," I said. "I have grandkids," she said simply. "I know what a child sounds like when they're scared." That was 4 months ago. June is settled in now. She has a room with yellow curtains because she picked them herself at the store, standing in the aisle very seriously, considering her options, before announcing that yellow was the happiest color. She goes to school 5 days a week. She brings home drawings. She has a friend named Lily from down the street who comes over on Saturdays, and they spend hours doing things in the backyard that involve Captain the Rabbit and an elaborate mythology I am not invited to fully understand, but am permitted to observe from the porch. Her appetite came back within the first week. She eats like she's making up for something, which I suppose she is. I've started making Sunday breakfasts the way Pauline used to. Eggs over easy, toast with the good butter, orange juice from actual oranges. June now considers this non-negotiable. Cliff is completing his parenting course. We have spoken several times. It is not easy, and it is not simple, and I don't think it's supposed to be. He's in therapy, which I recommended, and which he resisted, and which he is now attending regularly. And I consider that a form of progress. I love my son. That fact coexists with other facts, the way things do in real life, where nothing is clean. Tara and Cliff are no longer together, which he told me over the phone with a flatness in his voice that I recognized as someone trying very hard not to show you how they feel. I didn't ask questions. I said I was sorry, because whatever had happened between them, I know that the end of something is always its own kind of loss. What I think about when I'm sitting on the porch while June and Lily conduct their inscrutable backyard operations is how many children don't have a Dolores, how many locked doors no one knocks on. I spent 22 years in this work, and I understood it abstractly, professionally, the way you understand statistics. Then June looked at me from that floor with Pauline's eyes and said she was hungry, and I understood it in a way that goes straight to the bone. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm 63 years old, my truck has 200,000 miles on it, and I make a pretty good egg. I have Captain the Rabbit watching me from the kitchen table with his one remaining glass eye, and I have yellow curtains in the hallway catching the afternoon light, and I have a granddaughter who will explain earthworm behavior to you at length if you give her half an opening. I'm telling this because Dolores almost didn't knock, and whatever made her knock, some instinct, some refusal to talk herself out of concern. That thing matters. It matters every time. Trust it. Knock anyway. I've been sitting with this story for 4 months now, trying to figure out what it actually means. Not the legal part. That resolved itself the way these things do, when the evidence is clear and the documentation is solid. I mean the part underneath. The part that keeps me up sometimes when the house is quiet and June is asleep down the hall. Here's what I keep coming back to. Clifton didn't become someone who could leave his daughter in a locked room overnight, because he was born that way. He got there one small decision at a time, one moment of looking away. One time he let convenience matter more than accountability, and then that became normal, and then the next thing was easier to justify, and the next thing after that. That's not theology. That's just how human beings work. We become what we repeatedly choose. Clifton chose, over and over, to let someone else carry the weight. Tara, the cousin. The idea that June was mature for her age. Until the weight landed on a 7-year-old girl with an empty sleeve of crackers and a stuffed rabbit for company. I am not outside that story. That's the part I had to sit with hardest. I saw the signs. I noticed June getting quieter. I felt that cold thing move through me when Cliff described the check-in arrangement, and I let his irritation redirect me. 22 years in child welfare, and I let my own son's annoyance override what I knew professionally to be a warning. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I hadn't seen enough yet. The truth is simpler and harder than that. It was easier not to push, and choosing easier, for me too, had a cost. What Dolores did, knocking on that door when every reasonable instinct told her it might just be her radio, that was the opposite of easier. She stood in a stranger's hallway and decided that being wrong about this was better than being right and silent. That's not a small thing. It's the thing. Every situation, like June's, depends entirely on whether there is a Dolores in the building. Someone who hasn't yet decided that other people's problems are not their problem. I think about the word integrity a lot lately, not in the polished way it gets used in speeches, in the plain way, the way a structure has integrity when all the parts are actually holding together, when what's inside matches what's visible from outside. Clifton lost that integrity somewhere, in the gap between the father he presented to me and the father he actually was at home. Tara never had any stake in closing that gap, and I had abdicated my responsibility to look closely enough to see it. June has it, though. That integrity, she sat on that floor 4 days, and she read her books, and she took care of Captain, and she told the truth the second a safe adult appeared. She didn't catastrophize. She didn't collapse. She said she was hungry, and she meant it plainly, and she ate the sandwich Dolores made and explained her rabbit's legal system to a CPS caseworker with complete seriousness. There's a kind of resilience in that child that I didn't put there. It was already hers. My job now is just to make sure nothing grinds it down. What I want to say, if anything in this is useful to anyone, the quiet discomfort you feel when something isn't right, that low, persistent signal you keep explaining away, it is not paranoia. It is information. It costs me time I can't get back before I listen to mine. Listen to yours sooner. And if you're standing in a hallway and you think you hear something behind a closed door, knock. Just knock.